before, we focused on the fracking issue, and Michael is back here today to talk about his book. Michael, welcome.
Thank you,
WRFI. We are WRFI, Watkins Glen, Ithaca. We got Michael here today to talk about his book and a little background and some other developments in the fracking world. Michael, your book is called The Fracking War.
Yes, my book's called The Fracking War for a whole variety of reasons. But first of all, for having me on again. It was fun being on here before, but moved on the Army back in the fall.
Right.
It's great to be here again.
Glad to have you.
The book is about, not about a war exactly in terms of what you would think of as people shooting, although I don't want to spoil too much of it for readers, but there are shooting and there are some issues going on in that book that lead you to the war. But what the book's really about is the sort of the things that we know about fracking, that we already see: the civil disobedience, the pollution, the corruption in lots of different places. But it also throws in some other interesting twists which novelists can do that journalists can't do.
I was curious as to your choice of the novel format for something that is so laden with facts, information, history, and background. Share more with how you reached that decision.
Well, I've read a number of the really excellent volumes on fracking out there. And like you say, there's volumes and volumes on fracking, factual volumes. One of the best books on hydrofracking, nonfiction books, is Tom Wilber's book. And the name of which escapes me at the moment, that will come to me while we keep talking. Tom Wilber, is a journalist, wrote a good book. It actually uses some parts of what we would call literary journalism in it, and there's a lot of storytelling. But so much of what we know, we being people that I think have studied this, know about fracking and believe about hydrofracking, the pollution, the illness, the different issues that people are dealing with, the decline of property values, all these things. Journalists are stuck with a model that says, if you start to write about people's property values, for example, declining, you have to then go to some authoritative source, like a gas company, or an association of realtors, and you have to ask them. You have to say, is this true?
You have to get their response, their insight, input, and handle.
They call it balance. Fox News calls it fair and balanced.
Yes.
They are anything but. However, because of that, you have to sort of put these two things together, and in a model of journalism that most people subscribe to, with the exception of Fox News, you have to have this sort of balance going on, which in the minds of readers or viewers, it doesn't always work well when you have a really, in this case, I believe, a strongly one-sided argument which says, I don't think hydrofracking can be done safely.
And that is the premise and the bottom line you start with, and you take it to a level of imagination and action that starts off very potently.
Yes, you've read the first chapter probably.
Yes.
That's some of there's more shooting in the first chapter of The Fracking War than there is, well, actually that's not true. There's some more later on in the book. But a book like this, it is sort of a page turner. It's a suspenseful book. I think that the drama and emotion is there in the hydrofracking story. You just don't see it in a nonfiction book that has to talk about how many millions of gallons have been poured down the well and that sort of thing. But we see it every day in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, and other places where people are losing their homes, people are sick, despite what a gas company might say.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too in terms of how we describe and experience violence. Some is on a very quiet, subdued level. But I can imagine if you're drinking water in Dimmock, that's as violent as an experience as I probably had in my life.
Yes, absolutely. And so that was the reason that I went with the novel, because in the novel, you can take all of these threads and you can weave them together into a dramatic story. And yet, at the same time, with, as I say, the exception of some extrapolation on my part in the book follows the news. In order to do research for this book, I didn't spend a lot of time with the science textbooks. I spent a lot of time watching the stories from across the country, which is one of the problems of, again, sort of traditional journalism looking at it. There's all kinds of things happening in California and Colorado and Montana and certainly North Dakota, which is a wholly owned subsidiary now of a natural gas company. But no one really puts all those pieces together into one sort of package.
So you wanted to build a narrative around that big scenario.
And I was able to do that, and I used the device of a newspaper, which is of course familiar to me, in order to pull those threads together, and that's how the story gets told.
Gotcha. And in that whole process, you want to develop characters, tell the story, and share insights and angles. Do you seek some conversation about the elements of fracking that some folks are enamored with?
Well, there's parts of it in there. I didn't spend a great deal of time talking about the wonderfulness of what fracking gives us, because I personally think that natural gas is a good fuel. I know there are people that are not happy with natural gas for a variety of reasons. I think it is a good fuel. I prefer not to see it all shipped to foreign ports, which is one of the big things that's going on, which is touched on in the book in numerous places. My complaint at this point, and in writing the book, focused a lot on the water issues, which is certainly something that's very, very near to our hearts here in the Finger Lakes. It wouldn't take a lot of more water pollution. We have some more water pollution problems to get our water situation so it wouldn't be as tenable as it is right now. And that is such a big issue in other states such as Texas.
Mm-hmm. Like where the cooperation with the industry is so complete and so intense,
right?
That the conversation about water is much smaller than it is here.
Right. Back in my early days as a journalist, nuclear power was something that was growing very fast in the United States, and I was always very suspicious of it. Again, because industry was just a little too happy about that there were no problems with it. Whenever anyone says there's no problems, don't worry about it.
Beware, yeah, that's a big indicator.
It terrifies me. It just terrifies me, Bob. And so in my early days of my career, and before I went into teaching, I was a journalism professor for some years. I did a lot of work with looking at what we were doing, what the nation was doing, what the nation is actually still doing with nuclear waste. Mm-hmm. And it always occurred to me that if you have a product, whatever that product is, and you have a byproduct that's toxic, and you can't figure out what to do with it, you have a really serious problem. And nuclear power was on the decline, and still is not a growing industry, certainly in the United States, even though the waste of that is still being stored in one of the caves, and I think most of it is in Nevada.
Yeah, talk about a toxic waste storage problem.
Yeah,
there's the preeminent prospect of all when we manage to nudge these conversations aside to try to get the gain that we can.
Right.
And there's one where we still really don't have anything figured out about how to dispose of nuclear waste at all.
And if I was in the hydrofracking industry, which thankfully I'm not in the hydrofracking industry, but if I was, my number one priority would be to try to figure out how to make the water that goes down that shaft that breaks loose this natural gas, how to make it non-toxic on its way down. And if I couldn't get that part figured out, I think the second priority would be, how do you fix it when it comes back out? How do you clean it up? And the book talks a little bit about that, too. There's some scenarios in there about that, which don't end all that happily, but that's, again, what do you do with this stuff? And what road have we not only us, meaning the United States, but most of the world is headed down this path.
And the recent study in Pennsylvania about upstream water and downstream from the treatment facilities, where they found 200 times the radioactive material in the water downstream as was upstream. And it's like, whoops, that's what they're pumping back into the river after treatment. And really not even looking at removing radioactivity from the water.
Well, it's it's such an incredible conundrum for anyone who is in the industry, in the water cleanup industry, we'll call it. How can you possibly, at a water treatment plant, clean up the water when the water that's coming in contains chemicals of which you don't know the names of?
Yeah, you're not
concentration type.
And no one's allowed to tell you.
Right.
Yes, it's just this most bizarre, incredible area of considerations and accommodations for people who want to make a buck that you could ever imagine. Like, I mean, I understand your book is a work of fiction, but if you went out to describe this, set out originally before fracking to describe this, people would just say, oh, come on, no one's got to support an industry that creates that much danger in those ways that the combinations of chemicals are proprietary to the level where a doctor can't tell his patient what they're treating them for. I mean, it's just incredible.
Exactly, and I actually touch on one section of the book quite a bit on the issue of doctors in Pennsylvania. And I touch on it, I became very interested in that, and included that as part of the narrative of this book, because if you were to talk to, if we had a call-in show, which would be a great idea, by the way, Bob, you'd be a great call-in guy. I call in all the time. If we had a call-in show right now, I would be challenging the gas industry people to give me a call about this, the gag law in Pennsylvania. Because if you were to ask them about that in any of these forums, online forums and internet forums that they sponsor, largely to promote hydrofracking, they will claim that there is no gag law on Pennsylvania doctors. They'll say that's just not true. It's a misinterpretation of the law.
Yeah.
But if you were to talk to a doctor in Pennsylvania, they would say, well, it's not a misinterpretation, but I can't talk about it.
Wow.
And so
even to that extent.
Even to that extent. They're very leery. They have to sign confidentiality agreements and all kinds of things. Doctors, beyond what the normal doctor-patient relationship is involved with. And so when you take that kind of a scenario from a novelist standpoint, it defies credibility, but at the same time, you just are describing a situation that does exist, and it has all kinds of ramifications for people that we don't see in the normal mainstream press.
Yeah, and if there's ever a group that you thought could rise up and thought would have the credibility, the power, and the ambition to say, go straight to hell to this law, you'd hope it would be doctors, a group of doctors who say, our patient care is our priority. We don't care what you say, what you do, or what you do to us. We're going to follow through on care of our patients and also provide them with the information about the treatment they're receiving and what it happens to be for.
Right, and there have been a few cases where that has taken place. I didn't focus too heavily on that, largely because there hasn't been, as you just suggested, there hasn't been a revolution in the medical field. There haven't been people standing up, taking that kind of stand.
Yeah.
But there have been lots of people in other arenas with civil disobedience actions, with various things like that were that made for a little better story, partly because I was able to reflect what people are reading, again, in spots here and there. Even right here in Schuyler, now we're in Tompkins County, but in Schuyler and Tompkins counties, we have an incredibly active group working against hydrofracking. I was just talking today with the person who's going to be doing the cover art for this book, for the Fracking War. His name is Will Sweeney. If you have ever purchased or worn an anti-fracking T-shirt in the last 2 years, there's a good chance that his design is on the cover. Very good design of him of the Statue of Liberty swinging at these hydrofracking towers.
Oh, right.
A powerful image.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with him a few hours ago about the cover that he's going to design for me. Will and I were talking briefly about all of the people in New York State who have signed a pledge that if hydrofracking is in fact allowed, what he's going to do, what they are going to do, they have pledged to do, is they'll basically lay down the road in front of the trucks.
And hundreds of people have taken that.
Actually, about 1,000.
1,000 people. Wow. Yeah. You know, Michael, I try to remember my conversations with folks who I respect who feel differently than I do, and try to get to the points of understanding and ask myself the question that I mentioned to you earlier, and that is, if I find fracking too dangerous now, what precisely would have to occur in order for me to get more comfortable with it? How do you respond to that question?
Well, for me, in terms of what would ever make me sort of change my mind about hydrofracking, the number one thing first would be the water issue. If the water issue was solved, by the way, a character in the book, I'm talking as if I'm a character in the book here, because that's pretty much one of the things, one of the issues that's
a direct quote from one of your characters.
If the water issue was solved, if they could figure out, A, how to not put poison, toxic chemicals rather, down to make this happen, and at the same time, when they pull the water out that it's not toxic, it would, for me, would remove a lot of my reservations about it. Now, I still don't think it's a really good idea to be causing very minor, what they would call minor, they would call them tiny, actually, earthquakes. When there used to be an advertisement years ago that said, "Don't fool with Mother Nature." I don't know if you remember that. It was a television advertisement. And I just don't think it's a good idea to be causing earthquakes. I've been having quite a bit of conversations with my colleagues and friends in the state of California, which has just started hydrofracking.
They're a little jumpier about earthquakes out there.
With good reason.
Yeah.
Because the entire state is crisscrossed with earthquake faults.
Mm-hmm.
And if at any time, I can imagine a scenario in a book like mine, but in others, where a earthquake could be set off by hydrofracking.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this from Ohio, nearby Ohio.
Yes, that whole sequence of earthquakes.
That it is happening.
Yeah.
It's also the classic example, or a good example, of the gas companies saying there's no definitive proof that what we are doing with those wells causes earthquakes. It's a total coincidence that we started fracking 6 years ago, and since then, the earthquake scenario, they've had 500% more earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's just a geological pattern that happens to be rolling around once again every 50 million years or so.
Exactly.
Yeah, Michael, for myself, I have the same question. I guess I would prioritize my hesitations, and certainly, for me, worker exposure to the chemicals, I fear, is something that's going to come down soon. I met in the course of one of the gas-free Seneca events a couple of guys in the industry who had been exposed to frac chemicals, and they were desperately afraid that they were going to experience, that they felt they had already experienced very deleterious effects from the frac chemicals that they had been exposed to, and they thought it was going to get worse. And I just picture these young guys out on a frac pad, wrestling with all kinds of pipe and tools, and some of that fluid spills out and gets on them. And it's soaking into their bodies, and some of that stuff is, gets through your skin extremely rapidly. And I just picture these guys as they're in no position to say, "Hey, boss, I got to take a break," or, my sense is that they don't have a procedure in place to hose these guys down, get them cleaned up. And when we read that medical incident in Colorado where the nurse treating guys who had had a frac exposure had organ failure from her exposure to their exposure, that woke me up to another level. So I'd say, kind of like that unspoken exposure and what's going to happen. And for me, that's always like the tobacco story, How are you going to really prove that guy's organ failure was due to those chemicals, especially since the chemicals are supposed to be a secret, right? So that's a big one for me, the water factor and the chemical migration and aquifer despoilation in Wyoming. And, there's the most pristine wilderness in the world, one of the most pristine in the world, Wyoming, and they've tampered and fracked so much out there, they've already destroyed an aquifer. To me, it's just astounding that we keep rolling in this direction. But again, I try to get towards that play. I know they're trying to do fracking with propane, blow up gas beneath the surface, and see if that frees up. If you use less gas to make the explosion than you harvest, then that might be an angle. Or just, can they find a way to pressurize air to the extent that
method of doing it. They have free rein to dump anything, quite literally anything, down these wells, put it under great pressure. There's no financial incentive. There's no government oversight incentive. In fact, if anything, the government has backed off to a degree that's absolutely terrifying.
Just amazing.
Absolutely terrifying. So from their perspective, it's like, well, I'm not sure why we really need to what's the incentive?
Why would we change? There's no harm proven here. Things, so I hear you, and then for me, I realize also I try to be open about, to a certain extent, I'm a NIMBY about this. To me, fracking in the Finger Lakes, I don't get it at all. Fracking in an economy that's tourism-based, especially in my hometown of Hector, where we've got this development of wineries and breweries and restaurants that's so spectacular, so enlivened, and it's becoming a sturdy little economic base there for some other beautiful things to grow out of. Why we would tamper with that is beyond me. And why the governor hasn't included the Finger Lakes in his restricted areas, with the Syracuse water table and New York City watersheds. I just don't understand it.
Well, the gas people, and I have spent a good part of my time for several years now, but certainly in the last year since I started writing this book and now I've completed it, the gas folks are saying that the real time element on this will be in June when the Dryden case is supposed to go before the Court of Appeals. And they're sort of saying that that's where the line in the sand will be drawn, that if the Court of Appeals rules against Dryden and says, yes, they cannot deny fracking within 10 limits, that the governor will be forced into taking action, and of course they believe that the governor will, in fact, at that point, say, yes, we're going to have fracking. I'm not sure that they're right, because they huff and puff an awful lot about an awful lot of things. But that was the most recent thing I read in the last few days, that they're kind of looking towards that. Now, that might be bluster to keep the stock prices up. It might be, to keep the investor money coming in. I do take a pretty good look at some of those things in the book, too, because there's strong evidence that the whole gas situation is really, pardon the pun, a bubble, and that this gas bubble is going to burst.
I've heard it described as something of a Ponzi scheme, where they keep getting the banks to back them and stockholders to buy shares, and they go ahead and create this infrastructure to harvest gas that is not going to be profitable to pull out of the ground.
And the reports, the investor reports on, for example, how much gas a particular well will produce is based upon the first week or first few days or week of the gas well's production.
Well, super heavy flow.
Very heavy flow, and within a month, it's tailed off, and away it goes. So,
there was a report just the other day about looking at the New York play of the Marcellus Shale as being too shallow and too thin to be especially profitable. So I imagine there'll be some banter back and forth about that, but I think that part of what investors are finding out is that they're not as confident in the gas companies as the gas companies would like to have them be.
Well, and I understand that. I as soon as I read that report, and I want to be heartened by that report as a person who lives here in the Finger Lakes, who lives in Hector, actually, not too far from here. But underneath the Marcellus Shale is another layer of shale called Utica Shale, and it's much deeper and much harder to get to, but it happens to be as rich or richer, I'm told, but I read from the gas people, too.
So they may just go after that.
They might. I do want to tell people that, because we've gotten some requests, people want to know about, can they get a hold of this book?
How do they get their hands on this thing?
Well,
they can't
get their eyes on it just yet, because it's at the publishers, and it should be out. It should be out in a print version in about 12 weeks maximum. In 4 weeks, we believe that and I did this backwards in the publishing industry for a very specific reason, the electronic publication should be out within 4 weeks. So if you have a Kindle or an iPad or a Nook or any of the other electronic devices, the book will be available. And we started a program just a week ago. It's called a Kickstarter. And some people in the audience, I suspect, have heard of this. and it's usually used as a fundraiser to start your project. We're using Kickstarter as a way to let people pre-order the book, so that the minute the publisher says go, I can then release these books to people. So if anyone's interested in getting a copy of this book, the minute it's out, you simply go to Kickstarter.com and you type in the Fracking War, and it'll take you to a page. And on that page, it will also give you the first chapter of the book.
Yes, they can get a sneak preview.
That's right.
And they'll have access to the book when they're ready.
Absolutely.
Great, Michael. It's been wonderful to have you here today. Thanks so much for coming in and sharing your story and the story that you've got coming out in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, man. Take care. Folks, here's Thousands of One with Revolution.
The Fracking War will be available as an ebook for Kindle, iPad, Nook, or other e-readers by December 1st, 2013. The book can be pre-ordered by pledging to purchase through Kickstarter.com. To pre-order an ebook or printed copy, log on to Kickstarter.com and just search for The Fracking War.